Guys, let's welcome Terry Manning to Barside Jive on the air. Terry is with us, and how are you, Terry?
I'm doing great. How are you, DC? It's good to be with you.
Man, it's a pleasure having you. I got to ask you, how does a kid from El Paso, Texas, end up working with artists such as Otis Redding, Ike and Tina Turner, Led Zeppelin, Leon Russell, Brian Adams, and on and on and on?
Wow, it's being at the right place or lucky place at the lucky time, a lot of it. Of course, I worked hard and I always tried to do good work and be places and be the first one there and everything. But what a journey. Literally did start in El Paso, Texas, as a mid teenager in junior high school. What really got me going, I went to see, we had a school dance, a class dance, sixth grade? No, eighth grade, seventh grade homeroom dance at Bassett Junior High School in El Paso. And we went to this party, and the band they had hired was Bobby Fuller, who a few years later was the Bobby Fuller Four with #1 in the world records, I Fought the Law, and some
Oh,
others.
yeah.
But
Wow.
it was the first time I saw a band live ever. And I was just, oh my God, I like this. This is good. So I actually went up to in the middle when he finished the set. I went up at the end of the set as they took a break and said, "Hey, Mr. Fuller, I've got a guitar at home and I love to play and I love music and you've really inspired me here. Do you think I could sit in with you?" This is like a
Wow.
14-year-old kid or some 13, something like that.
Yeah.
And he was such a wonderful man. He was a few years older. To me, he was a man, but he was really probably 20 years old or something.
Yeah.
But he was such a gentleman, so nice. And he looked down and said, "Sure, son, come on up." Gave me his Stratocaster, and picked up the other guitarist's guitar and said, "What do we play?" And we played together Peggy Sue, and I sang it. And then we did "Oh Donna," Richie Valens' song.
Wow.
And so I sang to my junior high class. And the date I had, we tried to dance, and I didn't like dancing. I think it's become a thing for musicians not to dance, as I see now. But I didn't really enjoy the dancing, didn't want to dance. So I just made her sit in the corner and watch.
Wow.
Anyway, that was Stephanie Nix, who sat in front of me in junior high. She later joined the band and changed her name to Stevie. So
Wow. Really?
my first date.
Seriously?
Honestly, it was. I would pull her pigtails, and she sat in front of me in class. And this story's been told a couple of times, but it's always well worth it. I was kind of smitten, I guess you'd say, or a crush, schoolboy, young kid crush, and didn't know how to act with a girl. Hey, wait, I still don't. Oh well. And I'd pull her pigtails or shake her chair or something like that. And she one day just got sick of it, grabbed her pencil, turned around and stabbed me in the knee with her pencil. And the lead is still there. I ought to hold my knee up to the camera so you can see, but
I think you
there's a
should.
little there's a little black dot on my knee to this day where her pencil lead broke off.
Wow. That is amazing. I,
But to think back in that room at the junior high dance so many years ago, that in the room was Bobby Fuller, who became a huge star, Stevie Nicks, who became an even bigger star, if there's not many bigger, and then me, that ended up working in the business, not as a star, but behind the scenes more often. But it's really odd to think back on. I wonder who else was in the room.
wow. She was from El Paso?
Well, she wasn't from here. Her dad was in the military. And El Paso is one of the biggest military installations in the world. Fort Bliss, there's an Air Force base. There's just everything here. All the missile testing just outside of town in New Mexico up at White Sands. So military, this town is half military to this day.
Right.
And she came in with her father in the military. And I assume, because they were here for a year or two and then left, and that's the story I heard, that it was military.
Wow.
I think
That,
she was from Arizona or went to Arizona.
yeah. Was that the first relationship you had that kind of went sour?
Sour? That's a great question. Fortunately, I'm in one now that's the actual really good one, that I know won't go sour, but many do along the way, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. What a cool story though. I had no clue. I hadn't heard that. That's awesome. Well, tell me about Bobby Fuller, because very talented guy,
Oh,
amazing artist, but has such a short life. I mean, in the circumstances around his death are really interesting.
yeah, he is really my prime mentor, I guess you'd say, in life and role model. Because being a young teenager and him being just a few years older, but that seems, when you're young, that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, and he was probably 4 or 5 years, is a huge gap when you're that young. Now it's not, when once you get into adulthood. But I looked up to him. He had his own record label. He had his own, you could call it a home studio, but it's not a, I mean, it had Ampex tape machines and Telefunken microphones. He got the real deal, one of the first I ever heard of, in your house. And believe it or not, his house was at 9500 Album Avenue. I've
Wow.
always thought what a coincidence that was.
Yeah.
But he had a nightclub, his own nightclub called the Rendezvous, and he was on the radio all the time. He was on the little dance party TV shows that were here in El Paso, and I was just taken with that. Like, wow. So I would start, after I met him at that dance, I started bothering him. Uh, Really, I look back now and I was a pest. I'd call him up. He had given me his phone number. I'd go by the house. I'd hang out. I'd ask a question. How do you write a song? And how do you produce a record? And what are you doing? Why are you pushing that? What are you doing here? Just, if someone was doing that to me, I'd send them away probably and lock the door. But he was so nice, such a sweet guy. And he did let me, he taught me many things that I literally use to this day in a recording session. The biggest thing I remember him telling me, I'm rambling. Okay. Him telling me, I was saying, what is this producing? What are you thinking? And he said, the important thing to me is to focus on the details and get each one of them right, but never lose sight of the big picture. So you have to do two things at once. And he actually said, you have to have a microscope and you've got to back out and use a telescope at the same time.
Hmm.
And that got in my head, and I just, wow. And I do think of that in every session of, yeah, because you can get hung up on details, as I'm sure you know. You can get hung up on little things and lose your focus. So I'll spend hours on one tiny little phrase, trying to get it just right. But every second of that, I'm thinking, how does it fit? How does it go with this? How does the bass and the guitar and the drums work with that, and whatever else is on the record? So he taught me things like that. Then at one particular time, I remember the last time I saw him was at the Skylanes bowling alley on Dyer Street in El Paso. I was at a church bowling league, and there he was sitting at the concession stand at a table eating a sandwich or something. And I just, oh, great, I've got to go talk to Bobby. So I ran over there and was talking to him. And he had just come back from Nashville. He tried the Buddy Holly route of Nashville first. Didn't work for either one of them in Nashville. So
Yeah.
he said, I've been to Nashville, I recorded and I'm on a label, and it just nothing was jiving. It wasn't selling. It wasn't working out. And he seemed very depressed. And I said, well, what are you going to do next? And he said, I'm going to California. I'm going to pack up the band. We're going to go to California, which is what they did. Right at that very time, he said, well, hey, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm moving too. I'm moving to Memphis, Tennessee. And he said, oh, there's music there. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, yeah, I know. I've bought these records that say Stax on them, and I see the address there, and I can't wait to get to Memphis. So he went to LA, ended up with #1 record, or close to #1 of I Fought the Law, and
Right.
a couple of others, Love's Made a Fool of You, Let Her Dance, some really great recordings on the same record company that had Richie Valens and several other acts. But sadly, Bobby was murdered. And I say murdered, it's not officially in the record as a murder, but I say it was, in the parking lot of his apartment building, right across the street from the building that Janis Joplin had died in a few years later. But there's a thing you can watch on Unsolved Mysteries about it and several other TV shows. Quite a mysterious thing of how he died. I'll stop this answer in just a minute, I promise.
No, you're good. You're good.
Right at that time, the day he was killed, the band I had been in El Paso, which was called the Wild Ones, I had left, gone to Memphis, been there a couple of years by this time, and Bobby was in LA doing great. And the band that I had been in, the Wild Ones, did even better without me, which is, of course, than when I was in it. And they were going to LA to try to make it too, maybe play with Bobby or do whatever. They arrived at his apartment building the very minute he was discovered and found, walked up, and there he was dead in the car in the parking lot. And one of them told me, the police, there was a can of gas in the car, partly filled, and some matches, but there hadn't been a fire. But the police took that can of gas and threw it in the garbage can. And one of my friends went up and said, "Sir, excuse me, officer, isn't that evidence?" And the guy answered, "It's just another rock and roll death. It's over." So they didn't investigate it. I call it murder. There's also a good book out by his brother, Randy Fuller, and Miriam Lina that tells a lot of the story, called I Fought the Law, I believe.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Such a tragic ending to such a talented guy.
Yes, he was very, very talented. He wrote, he sang, he played. People should go back and look at some of the YouTube videos of his TV performances on like Hullabaloo and Shindig, and there was another show. What was it called? Anyway, the ABC one. Amazing. I mean, they were amazing.
Yeah.
Really good band. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's the Bobby story as it relates to me.
So would he be the most influential person, I guess, then in your career?
Certainly one of them. I've been very lucky to have some mentors that I stumbled into their world, I guess you'd say, and they did mentor and help me and teach me and move me up along the way. Bobby was the first one. I'll tell the story of the second one, who is also a very famous person that I just lucked into. Another one was not an artist as such, but a guy named Al Bell, who ended up as the owner. Sometimes it was the co-owner of Stax Records. Also, he was the writer of "I'll Take You There," produced the Staple Singers and many other great acts. And
wow.
I worked with him for many years. He taught me so many things. And another great guy was named John Fry, who owned Ardent Recording Studios in Memphis and gave me many chances, as he did many other people, gave me chances to do things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I just love to spread the love to the people who were so kind to me like that.
Right. So you started out as a singer, songwriter, right? You were in bands there locally. And what caused the transition to, hey, I want to be a music producer, I want to be a recording engineer?
Yeah, I don't know that I thought those exact words per se, but as I said, I had played in the band, the Wild Ones. I called it Terry Manning and the Wild Ones, but once I left, they just went as the Wild Ones. But when I got to Memphis, I got in a band at Central High School called Bobby and the Originals. We later changed the name to Lawson and Four More, same exact band. And then when Lawson left the band, we changed the name to the Goat Dancers. So it was all the same four people for the whole time, and then a different singer. But yeah, I was in the band as a keyboard player and a rhythm guitarist. And I wrote, but not yet for the band or for. I was just writing for me, not even realizing what songwriting was. I just bang around on things. And when this band, Bobby and the Originals, when I first joined them in Memphis, they had already recorded a demo of 3 or 4 songs at a studio called Sonic, which was run by a guy named Roland Janes, who had been Jerry Lee Lewis's guitar player. He had a great little studio on Madison Avenue in Memphis, Sonic Studio. So they had been there, recorded the demo, wanted to get it on George Klein's Talent Party. Now, George Klein was Elvis's best friend, a WHBQ radio DJ, and had the TV show called Talent Party. So every band wanted on Talent Party. So that we took this demo down to George Klein, and he said, well, I like it okay, but the sound's not quite there enough for us. It doesn't sound great. So our manager at the time, Bobby Fischer, took the tape to John Fry, who at the time had a home studio he called Ardent. And again, a home studio with Ampexes and Neumann microphones and really good things.
Right.
Real home studio. And what I didn't know at the time, but he mastered it. That's what we'd call it today. But he equalized it, compressed it, got the sound up and pumping and popping and sounding good. And indeed, the band got on Talent Party. Well, watching John turn the knobs and do things, and having seen Bobby Fuller do those things too, was just, boy, this is fun. And my dad had always had tape recorders around. He was on the radio. He was a minister, but had a religious show occasionally doing talking and prayers and things. So I was used to running equipment. And so I just started hanging out in the control room, and it sort of just morphed as time went on. We left John's home studio. He put in a real for rent public studio with now great big console, Spectrasonics console, Studer machine, not Studer, Scully machines. And we went 4-track, the first studio with 4-track in Memphis. I was concurrently working at Stax Records at the same time. And that's another story, whole story. I guess I should get to that story. Should I just keep talking?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories there, Terry, but keep going. You're on a road.
Well, what happened when I got to Memphis and was in Central High School, I decided I'm going to find this Stax record place, because I had bought Walking the Dog by Rufus Thomas and Last Night by the Marquis, and they all said Memphis on the label, and I wanted to go find this place. So I took my Telecaster guitar to school one day, kept it in my locker, locked safely, and after school, instead of taking the bus in one direction home, I took it in the other direction and went down, got off on Macklemore Avenue, which is what Stax was on, and walked the rest of the way, rang the front bell at Stax. A woman at the time was on the front desk named Deanie Parker. And Deanie, I owe her a lot too, because she opened the door, smiled, and let me in. And said, well, little kid, whatever, what are you doing here? And I proudly said I had come to work. I was going to play guitar, and I could sing, and I was going to run the console and do anything they needed. I was there to work. And she laughed and was very polite and talked to me for just a few minutes, and then said, well, give us your phone number and maybe we'll call you someday or something. You're a little young now. I was just about to walk out, and a guy walked in the room, and he was very tall, and I thought distinguished and handsome, good looking, big guy, and I thought, ooh, he's somebody. And he looked down and said, hey kid, what you got in that guitar case? And I said, it's a Telecaster, sir. He said, well, let me have a look at it. So he opened it up, and this is the other big mentor I was going to mention. He opened it up and said, well, I play a Telecaster. I said, you play it here in the studio? Yes. And he introduced himself as Steve Cropper. So I just became friends right there with Steve. Again, I told him at 15 years old what I was there to do, and he laughed and said, can you run a tape recorder? And I said, sure. I always answer yes, by the way. If anyone asks you if you can do anything, answer yes. Go home that night and learn how to do it.
Right.
So, but I could run a tape recorder. So he took me back, and I would actually go back to the Stax Records tape copying room after class, after school job of copying tapes, safety copies and things, demos, things that they would send out. And then one day, someone came running down the hall. It was late evening. I was about to go home, and said, "Hey, can you run the console?" And I had never operated it in the studio. We're talking about the big studio room where Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Isaac Hayes, so many people recorded. Booker T, good
Wow.
God. In the studio, one of the great studio temples of the world. But I had been going down whenever I could and looking in out through the door and watching what they were doing and thinking I was figuring it out. So I said, sure. And I ran because somebody hadn't shown up for an engineer for a session. So I went down and just pushed a few buttons, and finally a sound came out. And he said, "Oh, good, roll tape." And I reached around and hit record and play, and the tape moved, and I was making a recording. So that it just that plus being at Ardent with John Fry, and I was an actual employee there, the first employee of Ardent Studio, doing those things at the same time, around the clock almost, just led to amazing schooling of seeing great engineers like John, Ron Capone, Dave Purple, Steve Cropper himself. He was a very good engineer. The founder of Stax, Jim Stewart, engineered many big hits, and just watching them, learning from them. What a school. I just can't believe how fortunate I was to just be there and be lucky.
Yeah. And they paid you to do that.
I know. Something you love and you want to do, and you get a paycheck. It wasn't much, but yeah.
Right, right. Guys, you are watching Barside Jive, and we are on the air with the legendary music producer and recording engineer, Terry Manning. Terry, tell me, I mean, you have worked with the greats. I mean, the list is long. Tell me about some of the most memorable projects that you've been involved in.
Wow, it's so hard to pick them out. I will say this: 95+% of everyone I've ever worked with was such a joy, such a pleasure, a treasure to be around such people and be with them. Some do stand out, so I don't want to minimize, and say and neglect others, but sometimes you just really have a special feeling. I'd say one of them for sure was working with Al Bell and the Staple Singers.
Mm-hmm.
Al took the Staple Singers, well, actually just Mavis Staples a couple of times, down to Muscle Shoals, and I tagged along since I was sort of Al Bell's right-hand guy at the time. I tagged along down, but when you go to another studio, you don't go in as the engineer or something. They run their show. So I was really just watching and being there if needed. And we tracked first Respect Yourself off the first album, first pop album that we did. A lot of great stuff. We would bring the tracks back to Ardent Studio on National Street in Memphis, and then the party began, because Mavis Staples is such a wonderful person. There is not a minute I've spent so much time around her, not a single minute is she not smiling, laughing, and just loving life. Such a great, great person. And all of them were Pop Staples, and then Yvonne and Cleotha and Purvis when we first got started. The whole Staples family as the Staples Singers.
Right.
It was just fun. They would bring in food and have a party, and everybody drinking, not alcohol, but just drinking sodas and drinks and waters, and eating chicken and pizzas and whatever, and just laughing and telling stories and having fun while you're working and making music. And that's the kind of thing I love so much, when you can enjoy it and just realize you're not just there strictly as a business. You're not there strictly to make money or have a hit, something like that. You're there to have fun, and that fun shows through if you're doing it right. So a session like that with the Staples was really amazing. Later in that same vein, I went with Al Bell out to Los Angeles, where we we, Al mainly and his huge coterie of people, put on a concert called Watt Stacks, which had all of the Stax artists playing in the Coliseum, at the time the Rams played the pro football stadium. It's still there as a stadium, 100 and whatever thousand capacity, and it was stuffed full with people, all the Stax artists, and I was in charge of recording it live. I had hired the Wally Hyder remote trucks, and all day, longest day of my life, I was running back and forth from the recording truck to the stage on one of the two stages on the football field, back and forth and back and forth, and
Mhm.
it's just things like that you just can't forget. It's insanity.
Yeah. Wow.
After that, working with Jimmy Page on the Led Zeppelin III album, that's unforgettable to me. I could write a book just about the stories of just on that one album of completing it,
Right.
because I didn't start the album. Andy Johns, Glenn Johns' brother Andy, had started recording it in England. And then they had a tour booked, didn't get it finished. And Jimmy had called me up. We had been friends for a number of years, and said, "Can you help me finish this album in between shows?" So Zeppelin would play a show. When it was over, Jimmy and whoever was needed would jump on a plane. Always Peter Grant, their manager, would jump on a plane, fly into Memphis. I'd pick him up at the airport. We'd rush over to the studio, work. Maybe it's all through the night. If it's 2 days in between shows, we'd do one night and then work the next day, and then they'd fly back to the next tour date. Then we'd do it again, then do it again. And I could say Jimmy was another big influence and mentor, because he wasn't just the guitarist in Led Zeppelin. He was the producer. He was the co-writer or writer of the songs. He had a total, complete vision of where he wanted to go. He knew exactly what he was doing. Nothing was by accident. And just watching him work was life-changing too. So many people. Another here I go again, but another great man who taught me a lot was a guy named Willie Mitchell. Now, Willie was the producer of Al Green, Ann Peebles, Syl Johnson, so many great things on his label High, distributed through London High Records, and had his own studio. But when they would finish something he felt was a single or had a good chance or was important, he would bring it over to the Ardent studio for final mixing. And I remember well the first time we started on something, it was one of the Al Green songs, one of the hits. And I just did my thing. I was equalizing and mixing and getting things. This is coming off of 4-track, but still you have to mix, and because it's in a way harder than multi-track, more multi-tracks. So I would get things like I wanted, and Willie would be watching, looking over my shoulder, or sitting right next to me watching. And he said, "Now, is that how you like it?" "Sounded pretty good to me, sir." And he'd say, "Well, it's not quite moving me." I said, "Moving? What do you mean moving? What does he mean moving you?" And then I watched him, and if I did a certain thing, like turn the bass to a certain volume or balance things a certain way, he would start moving. And I thought, he's feeling this. This isn't just analytically
Mm-hmm.
deciding what's needed. He wants to feel it.
Right.
He wants it to make him dance or to feel good or something. And it suddenly struck me that this was a two-pronged thing, this engineering thing. It wasn't just technical stuff. It was emotional stuff too. So, I mean, I learned that from him, and he would occasionally grab a fader, said, no, try this. And he'd move the certain thing to a certain place and say, "Now it moves me." And I would think, that's not where I had it or would have put it, but it is moving, isn't it? So, you learn things from everybody. Sometimes you learn from people doing things wrong, but usually you learn from people doing great things if you're lucky enough to be around them. I'll stop now. Sorry.
You're good. I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy, because Led Zeppelin, they were from the time I dropped the needle on my Gerard turntable on Led Zeppelin 1, I was a Zeppelin fan from then on out, and
Yep.
I love hearing stories about Led Zeppelin because of that reason. They've always been my favorite band ever. But I can't imagine the opportunity to get to work with him. Not just because he's an amazing musician, but he's just such a creative. He's just such a talented genius. That I just imagine that was an amazing experience.
Oh, it's so amazing. If you hadn't used the word genius, I was about to, because Jimmy really truly is not just a musical genius, but a philosophical genius too. He's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met,
Mm-hmm.
and I've met a lot of them. Billy Gibbons is another just brilliant mind. Could have been a nuclear physicist or a philosopher or something too.
Mm-hmm.
But Jimmy was like that, just stunning, really. And when you were actually around him back then, when he's not on stage, he was not meek, but he was quiet. He was not powerful or loud and obnoxious or anything like that. Just a refined, gentlemanly, intelligent guy. Of course, then you see him on stage and he's strutting around and whacking the guitar and hitting it with a bow, and you think he's a madman. But it's there are two sides to all of these super intelligent, super creative star people.
Yeah.
They're more than just what you see. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that Jimmy's quite the showman.
Oh yeah, and I know when you said that first, I came right into my head. Now I was already a friend of Jimmy's when Led Zeppelin began, uh, but I know exactly
Oh,
what you
because the
mean by putting
Yardbirds,
on.
because you did some work with the Yardbirds, right?
Well, our band did a show with the Yardbirds.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, that's what it
yeah,
was.
our
Okay.
band Lawson and Four More did a show. It was called. It's so funny to say it, but it was called Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars. Now, we weren't on the
Wow.
caravan, and we certainly weren't stars, but they needed opening acts in various markets to do, to start the shows off in the afternoons and late afternoons before the stars came on. Well, I was so excited. Everyone in our band was, because we were all huge Yardbirds fans,
Oh yeah.
and we were going to play and meet the Yardbirds. So I went back to other Yardbird tours after that, where we weren't playing, just because I could, and I would hang out with Jimmy and talk. And then one time he rode back with me from Murray, Kentucky. They had been playing at Murray State University, and he rode back overnight to Memphis, Tennessee with me. Got in very late, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock or something. And I took him right over to Ardent's studio, and where we ended up later working on Led Zeppelin 3. But this is years before. I took him to the studio. I got out my guitars, my amps. We jammed a little, played, hung out,
Hmm.
talked. He was so infatuated with Stax and Sun.
Mm-hmm.
He loved Memphis music. So believe it or not, this was a treat, an honor for him to be in a Memphis studio and talking, Stax and things like that. So we were very close at that point. He introduced me to Aleister Crowley, although I never got into that as deeply as he did or
Right.
believed it as much as he did.
Right.
But he also wasn't. I'll say this now: he wasn't a black devil magic person. Crowley was a genius too, incredibly intelligent. And Jimmy just read all the books and was infatuated with it. But there's no devil, bad Satanism or anything like that involved in it, as far as he was concerned. But yeah, so I know what you mean when the very first Led Zeppelin album one came out, and you dropped the needle on that thing, and it goes gang gang, and that bass drum hit the triplets and things. Everybody I know that in music did that same thing. Hey, come over, listen to this. You won't believe this.
Right.
Gang gang. Boom, boom, boom. Drummers going, how did he do that? Guitarist going, oh, I love that sound. Everybody. It changed rock music in 10 seconds for millions of people.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, even my 26, 27-year-old, 26-year-old, he's a huge Zeppelin fan.
My son is near that same age as too. Loves it.
Yeah, and that's something. It's going to last through the ages, I hope. But great music, and I'm just really curious. Your bio is like you read your bio, and it's like, dang, how wonderful to get to experience all those things in your life. But what was it like working in the most famous recording studio in the world? And I'm talking about Abbey Road
Oh,
Studios.
yes, I
I,
knew
I
that's what
mean,
it would be.
you know
In
it.
fact, I jokingly, when I later took over Compass Point Studios, another famous studio
Sure,
place, but
right.
I made a
We'll talk
motto
about it
up
in a
for us.
minute.
I said, Compass Point is the greatest studio in the world without Abbey in its name.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
Abbey Road was incredible. God, I mean, I was such a Beatles fan, and I just couldn't wait when I got a chance to record in England. Uh, they said, "Where do you want to record?" And I immediately said, "Abbey Road. Where else? That's where I want to go."
Yeah.
So I did several albums for a full year. I was resident there,
Wow.
and did several albums in there, and I just couldn't wait. And I would go into those rooms and just smell the walls, and
Yeah.
just incredible to think. Not only the Beatles, but Abbey Road was the first purpose-built recording studio in the world. Before that, people recorded in churches or in halls or in hotel rooms, or there wasn't a place that every day was a recording studio and at night it changed into something else. That was the first, and that was, I believe, 1937 or 8 or around in there. I don't remember the exact date, but the first session there was when they recorded the original version of Pomp and Circumstance with the London Symphony Orchestra.
Wow.
So just, I mean, what a place. The
Yeah.
history is incredible. I would go, I hate to say this now because it probably was somewhat illegal, but I was always the first person to get there for my sessions.
Uh-huh.
I learned that from another mentor, Mutt Lang, but I learned it from other people too. But you got to get there first, and you got to be the last one to leave. That's what you do. So many, many nights, late at night, all the other sessions had finished. My band had left. I was just there finishing up. Everyone was gone except the night guard, a guy in a little booth right at the front entrance. And he at night would fall asleep, just snooze there. So I was all alone in this place. So I would literally search and go through every inch of that building over and over and just look in every room possible. And there were, on the third floor, there were filing cabinets in the hallways, great big, because they ran out of room in offices. So the filing cabinets just lined the hallways. I would go open those cabinets up and just look in the drawers. They were session notes, copies of sessions. Sir Winston Churchill had files when he'd go in and record things for the Allied troops during the war.
Wow.
The people that were in these files was amazing. Of course, I would take out the Beatles files and read pages and pages. That's where Lewison's book recording about the Beatles recording came from, was those files. And they did it. It was like the Army. They did everything in triplicate. It would 3:30. Mr. McCartney ordered a tuna sandwich or fish and chips or whatever. It had every note of every session.
Wow.
So I just, as a fan, I'm a music fan. I'm just lucky to work in it, but I'm a fan.
Yeah.
So I would just learn everything I could about everybody.
Wow.
What a building, though.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I've heard so many stories about that place, and so many amazing artists have recorded there. It's wow.
Well, you never knew who you would see.
Yeah.
Walking down the halls.
Yeah.
One day I went in the toilet and just standing there in the stall doing my thing, and here comes somebody to the next stall standing there. I looked up, and it was Cliff Richard. Oh my God, I'm peeing next to Cliff Richard.
Wow. Yeah, that had to be an amazing experience. And
I didn't look, by the way.
Oh, come on now, Terry. You look just a little bit. You
You
had to know who it was.
Well,
you just didn't look
there
down.
were dividers. I could see his head over the top, but I couldn't see anything below the head.
Right. What do they call them? Water closets over there, right? Isn't that right?
They do, WC, yeah, WCs.
Yeah. I got to spend a little time over in part of the world, and there was a little bit of a learning curve, um, especially in the Middle East. But
Oh my God, yes.
that's another show. But let's talk about Compass Point, because you worked there, and Compass Point Studios, I know AC/DC recorded Back in Black there, right? And
That's correct.
and I guess everyone, much like Abbey Road, everyone from David Bowie to Clapton to the Stones recorded there, and it was a real cool place.
Yeah, the list is amazing of what Compass Point Studios recorded. So many acts. If I started naming them, I would go on and on and on forever and leave people out. So
Right.
I won't say too much of that, but I had decided to leave Memphis, uh, go to some place that was warm more often than Memphis was, even though it's plenty warm in the summer, but in the winter was warmer,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of get away. I thought in a stupid thought, maybe I'll slow down and not have to work as hard or something. But so I got in touch with Chris Blackwell's office. Chris Blackwell, by the way, is the founder of Island Records, the discoverer of U2, Bob Marley, Steve Winwood, blah, 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 goes
Yeah.
on and on and on. One
Yeah.
of the true great men of the music business. So I had worked on an Island record for him at one point. So I knew Chris a little bit, and we knew who each other was. So I got in touch with his office and said, hey, I'm thinking of maybe going down to Compass Point and seeing what's going on. And he got back in touch personally immediately and said, hey, I'm not doing anything with it right now. The guy who was operating it for me, a guy named Alex Stadkin, who himself was a great producer, Thompson Twins, lots of other acts, Foreigner, and was a great engineer, mastering engineer also. He had died there, unfortunately, in a car crash. And so at that point, Chris had nobody operating the studio, and he didn't feel it was going down, to be honest. It was without anyone with real music business acumen, someone who knows the business, knows a studio, knows how it runs, and which, no offense to the Bahamas, but no local person there would know that really,
Mm-hmm.
because you'd need someone from New York or LA or London, or maybe we could say Memphis in my case, or Nashville, someone who had been there, done that, and knew how it all worked. So Chris called me back and said, let's meet down there. I've got an idea. So I flew my plane down to Nassau and went in and met with Chris, looked it over, and it was in a bit of disrepair, a bit dirty. A room had flooded and certain things. And he said, you see what it's like. It really needs refurbished. Why don't we go in partners? 50-50 partners. We'll own it together. We'll do it together. But you'll be here and do it, and you'll report to me because I'll be somewhere else working.
Wow.
And I said, okay, let's do that. So I went down there, completely refurbished the whole thing, brought in tons of new equipment and tons of my own equipment because I already had 2 studios full of gear that I owned. Put it all in there, installed things, had 3 studios up and running, and just amazing artists. But it had the greatest sounding rooms I had ever been in, really, especially the Studio A room. Well, both of them, but the Studio A room was really special. When you listen to Addicted to Love by Robert Palmer, just listen to the intro and that drum sound, the snare, that crashing, cracking, echoey snare that's going on. I was always looking for that sound, and I'd buy a new reverb unit or a new thing and try to get that sound. I found out later, you just go in that room. That's what the sound is.
Wow.
The Studio A room, of course, it'd have a great drummer like they had, Tony. But I just couldn't wait again to work there. And it turned out, I didn't get more time off. It was even more time working, because now I was a producer and an engineer and a studio operator. And I had lots and lots of clients in that weren't me. I'd bring in a David Foster or a Hugh Padgham or a Mutt Lang, producers and great acts, Lenny Kravitz, the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Buffett, goes on and on and on. So many people. and talk about working around the clock. Ugh, that was that. But it was great fun, as always, great environment. But I will say I'm very glad to have now left there, because there are also problems running a studio in a small country. It's not the US or England or Australia, something, Canada, something like that.
Yeah.
Political problems, social things that happen that you cannot control,
Right.
customs duty that you have to worry about, immigrations forms, and all these things that just was so much extra work that I'm, as much fun as it was, I'm glad to have now lived that, done it, and left it.
Yeah. 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 How was it working with the Stones?
I didn't personally work on the Stones sessions. The particular one I was thinking of, other people were doing the work on it, but I would, hear it down the hall and be around and poke my head in, and but I didn't myself physically work on a Rolling Stones record.
Yeah. Did you? But
There,
did you have any contact with any of those guys?
well, a fun little anecdote of one thing going on. One of their road crew decided one day that he was going to, he was a married guy from England. He decided he had met this girl in a bar downtown, and he decided he would take her out on a boat ride. So he went out and rented a boat, just a 2-person motorboat, outboard motor, and went out in the ocean, got out of sight of land, which is not recommended if you don't know exactly what you're doing, and the motor quit. They couldn't get it started. Well, they go in for the session the next day, the Stones do. Well, where's so-and-so? He's not here. Well, I don't know. I think he was going out on a boat ride. Uh-oh, where is he? So it turned into Coast Guard search, airplanes, helicopters, people in boats all searching for this guy out there. 2 or 3 days he's missing. His wife flies in from England. Oh, my husband's missing. Well, unfortunately for him, he got found. Because he was out on a boat with another girl. But she had actually saved his life. I heard the story. She had caught a fish in her hands and squeezed water out of the fish and into their mouths to keep them going alive in this hot sun and everything. But funny things happened in sessions down there.
Yeah, I bet so. Yeah. Wow. Guys, you are still watching Barside Jive, and we are on the air with legendary music producer and recording engineer Terry Manning. Terry, you've got so many great stories and so many people I'd love to ask you about, but there's only 60 minutes in an hour, unfortunately. I want to talk a little bit about, I know you're such a talented guy. I guess you're a pilot, an artist, you're a singer-songwriter, you musician, multi-instrumentalist, but you're a photographer, and you have photographed some greats, including Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Chuck Berry, and one of the bands that I first heard on the radio when I was a young guy, Steppenwolf. Just to name a few. Yeah.
Well, yeah, photography is my other love, not counting my wife, of course, and kids, just meaning the love of things you do.
Right.
Music and photography, I would say it's equal. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds crazy if I've been lucky enough to work with Zeppelin and ZZ Top and Lenny Kravitz and so many great artists that I happen to be around. It sounds crazy to say you love something else too, but photography is, it is what I do, really. And I've done it as long as music, from the 60s until this very day. I'm working on things every day photographically. I've had exhibits in museums and galleries. Started that in 2015. It's funny because I've done it my whole life, and I used to literally work for newspapers and magazines as a photojournalist. Had several things in New Musical Express out of London, stories on different artists, and Steppenwolf was one of them. Terry Reid, Dusty Springfield, Chuck Berry, lots of things that I photographed and wrote about as a photojournalist. And I would shoot for bands, do album covers and things. And I had several of my photographs that would be an album cover or the inside of an album or in the ad for a group or something like that. So it's been my it's been my vocation as much as music for that long. But for years, when you start doing music, uh, you start earning money from it. You're in a session, and that starts paying the rent, making the money.
Hmm.
You 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 do that.
Right.
So I wasn't for a while. I sort of did less photography commercially for money, and more music because more money was coming in.
Right.
So the photographs I love, or they call them art photographs. You're an artist when you're photographing something that you see, that you like, that you want to immortalize and hope other people see and like it would be a painting, something like that, not a portrait of a person necessarily. But I would do those always. And finally, 2015, I had a guy at MIT trying to get me to dig out the photographs because he had seen one of my pictures of Dusty Springfield in a magazine. Some of my pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King had been certain places. People had seen them, and he said, "You've got to have more. Come on, you've got to have more." Finally, in 2015, he called me and said, "Well, if you're not going to do anything, I'm out. We're never going to do it." I said, "Oh, wait. Let's do it. Let's do it." So I got out the boxes of negatives, got out the prints, the old things I had done, put together, and started doing gallery shows in galleries and museums, which was really wonderfully fulfilling to me, just on a personal artistic level. Something else that not what I was known for, because you meet somebody and say, "Oh, hi, I like ZZ Top. Good to meet you,"
Yeah.
which is great. I'm not putting that down. That's wonderful. But now they were going, "Oh, you do this. I like that."
Yeah.
And that's really a nice feeling, to
Right.
now sometimes people would say, "Oh, I don't like that picture." And that's okay too, because you, as an artist, you've engendered a reaction. That's okay. You get a bad review on an album. I don't mind that. They took the time to listen. It affected them. That's all you can hope for. Same way with photography. So yeah, I did a lot of music portraiture photography, and with again, I got to be around people like Marvin Gaye and Jimi Hendrix and great people to just luckily be around and work with in a different way. So again, yeah, just a lucky thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it like being around Janis Joplin?
Do you really want me to answer
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I'll tell one funny story. I don't think Jimmy would mind. One day, this was at the Atlanta Pop Festival. I forget the year, but one of those years in the 60s or 70s, something. Uh, and Janis was on just before Led Zeppelin, I believe it was. So Jimmy Page and I had walked together around to side stage, and we're looking up, peering over, other people and trying to see what is she. I had seen her before in concert, but Jimmy hadn't, and he wanted to see her. So she was doing her thing and doing that incredible voice and great showmanship. And Jimmy was really enthralled, taken by it. And wow, yeah, she is good. And really, I'd say Robert Plant has a little bit of a Joplinish
Uh-huh.
sound in his voice back in those days too. So anyway, we get back in the trailer after Zeppelin had played. We go back. They had these house trailers set up backstage for each artist had their own trailer. And Jimmy and John Bonham was sitting right next to me, and I forget who else. So probably the whole band was in there. It had a table of snacks and drinks and things, and we're just sitting there talking. And all of a sudden, the door of this, that's a metal building, a house trailer thing. The metal door of this thing slams open, just wham, and everybody jumps like a bomb had gone off because it's metal hitting metal when the door slams back. And there's Janis Joplin standing there, just looking like an animal. And she looks down and says, "I want Jimmy Page." And everybody's just, oh, and I remember Robert Plant looking, kind of taking 2 or 3 steps back and said, "He's over there." don't come over here. He's over there. And Jimmy just, and she came over and pulled him up and just said, "You're coming with me." And he just sort of went out the door with her to her trailer. We never asked what happened. Didn't want to know really, but it was We could only imagine, and it was we really wondered that was what she was like. She had
Wow.
obviously been drinking, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, did you tell her, hey, I'm from Texas?
No, no. I just slunk back in my chair. Fortunately, I'm not terribly big and I don't stand out. So
You try to be as quiet as possible, blend into the wall.
I don't need that.
Oh wow, yeah, I understand. She was quite a character, but here again, she was one of those really talented artists with a really short lifespan. Uh,
Yeah, you think about these people, and I have been so fortunate to be around so many, as I was saying earlier, really great stars who are super intelligent,
mm-hmm,
and they all have the same characteristic. Now they're not the same. Everyone's different, and has Janis Joplin is not Jimmy Page. They're obviously very different, but each one of them has this spark, this you cannot beat me attitude. I will get their attitude, and they're super intelligent. So when you combine the talent, the intelligence, and the drive, those three things together, that's really what I found every star has. Now, some of them not as much of maybe the drive as others. One that has it in spades that I worked with is the artist Shakira. Uh, she is a very beautiful girl, of course,
mm-hmm,
and sings really well. But over every bit of her talent, everything, she was unstoppable. There was nothing going to
mm.
get in her way. When I first got a call, would you like to record Shakira? I was doing some other things, and I didn't know who she was. She hadn't had an English album yet. I didn't know. Tommy Mottola had wanted me to do it too at Sony, but I was just saying, no, it's not my thing really. I do better with male band things or whatever. And but no, she kept calling. She kept calling. She kept calling. And give me a fee. Give me a fee. So I finally just quoted her 3 times my normal rate and said, well, that'll get rid of her. But no, she paid it, which
Wow.
is great. My son got to go to university, so that worked well. But but she is unstoppable. If she wants something, she's going to get it, and
Yeah,
she got it. And there she goes with #1 hits in the world. But they're all like that. All the big stars are like that.
yeah.
I'm a very close friend of Sean Connery, and we do a lot of voiceover work. Did in Compass Point, but he again drive like you can't believe. Just this is going to happen, and it's going to happen my way, and it does.
Right, right. Wow. You got to tell me what it was like to work with Billy Gibbons.
Boy, another really brilliant genius. He is so smart. He's such a player. Again, has that drive. If you probably know it, but many people out there may not. But he was partly discovered by Jimi Hendrix. His band at the time had played a show with Jimi Hendrix, and Jimmy just, wow, this guy's great. Gave Billy one of his guitars. They hung out, and then Billy just, I'm going to get there too, and he did. But he's an amazing writer, a brilliant intellect. We would talk for hours on philosophical things, nothing to do
Hmm.
with music necessarily. He, as am I, is a great fan of AC/DC. When we did the Eliminator album, which was their biggest by far album ever, with Legs and Sharp Dressed Man and Give Me All Your Lovin' and blah, 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 and so many huge hits on it. When we did that, every morning before we started, we would put the not Back in Black, the Highway to Hell album on the turntable and blast a song or two just at full volume. Girls Got Rhythm or Highway to Hell, something like that, just blasting. And we'd look at each other and just wink, and that's going to be us. And we would, so many artists, including Billy, love other artists so much that they're inspired by them. So
Yeah.
at that moment, he's been inspired by a lot of blues artists, Lightning Hopkins amongst many others, and many other artists that he loves. But it doesn't all come out of one guy. And Billy's a good example of loving blues, then loving really heavy blues rock, if you could, Little Richard, which is what AC/DC was, uh, and just putting all these things together and making it your own that sounds your own way.
Right, right. So tell me what you're working on right now, Terry.
I'm working right now on some more. I do release albums myself, although these days it's best to release singles, which is what it will probably do, several singles in a row, the way the music business is. But I've had a couple of several CDs out. Again, I had my first album personally out in the like 1970 or 71, something like that, called Home Sweet Home, that became pretty well known underground kind of thing. But I, because again of having so much other people work to do that was paying money, I didn't do that much recording of my own. But again, around the early 2000s, 2010 to 2015 ish, got to thinking, it's time to do more of what I want rather than just what I do. So I started recording my own things. So I'm still working on several new things. I'm just working on my own record. In fact, during this COVID lockdown, I'm doing some things I'm calling the sofa sessions, where I sit on my living room sofa with my laptop and a good microphone and a guitar and whatever and some software and record things on my sofa. So I've got one I'm going to come out with that is my version of a song I co-wrote with Alex Chilton and produced on Alex Chilton back in 1969. And I'm going to do my own version of it, and I'll release that in just the next few weeks. I also have a song that I co-wrote with the Big Bopper that I'll be releasing after that. And you may say, how can you co-write a song with the Big Bopper? Because he died in the Buddy Holly plane crash in 1958, or was it 59? Anyway, because in the crash, in his possessions, when they cleared the scene, they got everyone's belongings and first held them at the sheriff's office in Iowa there, and then gave them back to family members later. There was a notebook. Now, the Big Bopper, and this is way off topic, but so what? The Big Bopper, as some people know and others may not, was a brilliant songwriter. He had written Running Bear, that was a huge hit. The George Jones thing, the whiskey, what is it? Anyway, the huge hit that started George Jones, had his own hits with Chantilly Lace. So anyway, they found a notebook of songs that Bopper had written for his next album that had never been recorded or finished. And I got a call from his son, J.P. Richardson Jr., who wanted to know if I would finish the writing of one of the Big Bopper songs and record it. And I just, wow, what an honor. Yes. So I took the words he had written, slightly rearranged them to fit, wrote the music for it, and recorded a song called What's the Use, co-written by J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, and me. How about that?
Wow.
And so I'll be releasing that later in 2020 as a single. But I'm also always mixing for other people, mastering for other people. I have a small studio here at my house I can still use with the lockdown, and building a larger one in the back, so I can do anything for anybody. So there you go.
Wow. Well, Terry, we got to do a part 2, buddy, because I can't get it all in. I can't get it all on in a 60-minute chat, but
I'd do it anytime. It's so much fun talking to you. I've always admired the things you're doing on this show too.
Well, I appreciate it, and you've just had an amazing life thus far, and I'm sure there's much more out there for you that we can't wait to hear about one day. But yeah, I'd love to have you back, Terry, because there's some stuff I'd like to talk about that we're not even going to get a chance today. But I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know an hour out of your day it's a lot, and I appreciate you giving that to me and to all of our audience, and just wish you and your family the very best of what life has to offer.
Thank you so much. Same to you, and it's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Terry, will you stand by just another second while I close the show? I want to chat with you real quick off camera.
Sure.
You have a minute?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Hang on just a second. Okay,
Sure.
guys, that was Terry Manning, legendary music producer, recording engineer, singer, songwriter,
I can't ever do
pilot, photographer, just a little bit of everything. And we're so glad to have him on this evening. And we're glad you could be a part of what we're doing here. Hope you enjoyed the show and hope you guys got home safely. We do appreciate your support of what we're doing here and hope you'll share us with your friends and followers. And until next time, be kind to one another. Can't talk now, Brad. Be kind to one another. Keep it real. Keep on rocking. See you next Monday.